Hello everyone. We're going to get going in a couple of minutes. Welcome everyone who's joining us. We'll get going in just a couple of minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Can everyone hear us okay and see the PowerPoint? If there's any technical difficulties during the session, just type in the chat box and we'll get that sorted out. Brilliant. So we've got a wonderful group of you guys today all taking part in the Christmas Challenge for the Big Give this year. So congratulations, first of all, on being part of the Christmas Challenge. And we're looking forward to doing this webinar today about planning your Christmas Challenge campaign. So how you can do that in a thought through and really effective way. My name's Lindsay. I'm a Learning and Development Manager at the FSI, and we're very excited to be working with the Big Give on these series of webinars to help you prepare. So this morning, we've got about an hour together. The first 45 minutes or so will be presentation from me. There's a little bit of time for Q&A. So we've got this chat box where you can ask questions, and we've also got a Q&A box as well. And we've got plenty of time at the end for further questions. So please do ask your questions throughout. Also share suggestions or ideas. If you've seen similar things that have worked for you, or maybe learnings that you've had, do share that in the chat box. It's really useful for other people to see. You are all muted currently, so you can't ask any verbal questions. Please do use the chat box instead. and you will get access to all the slides and the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I'm just going to make sure. And it is all being recorded as well. Do watch out for more webinars over the next few weeks to help you prepare. There's lots more coming up, so check out the Big Give information for that. If you have any very specific questions to your charity, you can pop them in the chat box, and Rachel, lovely Rachel from Big Give, will help you out. Otherwise, you can drop an email to the info address that you've got, and they'll be able to come back with some answers on that. First of all, welcome to the Christmas Challenge. Well done for all your hard work so far. I've done the Christmas Challenge myself before, so before I joined the FSI, I worked for a kind of small charity in East London, and we did the Christmas Challenge for several years. So I've been there, done that. I know how much hard work goes in just before even to get to this point. So well done. Especially congrats to those who've received champion funding and got all your pledges in place. So this is just an overview of how the campaign works, a reminder that it's running Tuesday 3rd of December to Tuesday 10th of December, midday to midday. And it's during that time that donations will be doubled during that week. Do make sure you go to the support section in your Big Give account area and to your dashboard, which has lots of resources to help you market your campaign, as well as your guidebook, your kind of marketing guidebook, which will accompany this webinar and the following webinars. So it might feel quite a long way to Christmas, even though we've seen the mince pies in the shops already. Everyone's hugely upset about that, but it's still time to start planning your Christmas challenge, and thinking it through at this stage will make it all that much easier come December. So this is just an overview, a reminder of how the match funding works. So the match pot is formed of pledge funds and champion funds if you secured champion funding. The first donations are doubled by your pledges, and then it's doubled by your champion. So you can see there, just a reminder about how it will work. So there are 5 key steps to go through when planning your Christmas Challenge campaign. We're going to look at each of these in turn in today's webinar. First of all, it's really important to set some clear objectives for your campaign. Without these, it's quite difficult to assess how successful you've been, or to learn from what works and what didn't to improve future campaigns. Having some really clear, thought-through objectives will help you to maximize your success in the Christmas Challenge for that week and beyond. The second step is around people. You need to consider who you're targeting with your campaign and to identify the different audiences, as you may need to adapt your campaign messaging or approaches for different audience segments. Then we come to the proposition. So actually, you found the people that you want to talk to. What are you saying to them? You might want to adapt your message slightly for different audience groups, although there should be one underlying core proposition. And we'll go through some of the messaging you can use for that. Then the promotion. So you've got your people, you've got the message, but how are you going to get that message to those people? There's lots of different ways to get your message out there, and you'll need to be communicating across lots of different channels, thinking about how best to reach your target audience and get that message across. And finally, planning. This is all about the detail. Scheduling, identifying what work needs to be done, in essence, ensuring you know what needs to be done, by when, and by whom in the lead up to the challenge, throughout it and afterwards as well. So that first step around objectives. I hope you've heard the term SMART objectives before. If not, we'll go through it now. We heavily recommend making some very smart objectives for your Christmas Challenge campaign. Firstly, they need to be specific. Your objectives should define what you want to achieve and how, in as specific terms as possible. Ensure that it focuses on what success looks like, not how you will achieve it. So there might be many different tactics to achieve an objective. Measurable. So it should be something you can quantify. For example, how much you want to raise, how many new supporters you want to engage. You might think about some post-campaign targets as well. For example, how many of new donors to the campaign do you want to convert to repeat support or ongoing regular giving? Achievable. It is important to balance ambition with reality. Don't set yourself a goal that you can't realistically achieve. Results focused. Focus on the results and what success looks like, not the process or actions that can come next. You'll need to identify clear actions you can take in order to deliver your objective, but that's part of the tactical planning coming up later in the strategy. Some people use the R in SMART for realistic as well. So making sure that you're being realistic with the capacity you have as well. Then finally, time bound. The Christmas challenge takes place over a very limited time period. This does create a sense of urgency for your donors, which is quite effective for fundraising. But you need to make sure that in turn, your objectives are also time bound. A few tips for writing some SMART objectives. Define your objective in terms of performance or results, not the process. So an objective wouldn't be to email 3,000 people on our database. An objective might in fact be to secure 50 donations from the 3,000 people on your existing database. That first one is focused on an action, a task, whereas the second one is an objective. Think about what success will look like and define it as specifically as possible. So really try and nail down the detail of what that will be and how you'll measure success. So you might want to consider, for instance, how much you want to increase your average monthly giving by as a result, or the number of new donors you want to engage in, as well as the total you want to raise. So you might have multiple objectives going on. Focus on strong action verbs. That makes your objective action focused and measurable and kind of forward looking. There are some examples in your guidebook which you'll be able to access soon. A few different examples comparing quite vague ones with some much more specific, measurable, achievable, and time-bound ones. It's much easier to therefore track your success against those kinds of objectives. As we move through the rest of the webinar and as you take this forward into your plan, you might actually need to revisit your objectives to ensure that they remain achievable and realistic. Here's an example from Deal Music and Arts, who have taken place in the Big Give Christmas Challenge last year. They raised over £5,000 last year as a first-time participant. And we really like the way they phrased their objectives. The second step is around the people. So thinking of all the people who are connected to your organisation, who you might want to approach to donate to your campaign. Start by thinking about the different groups of potential supporters. For instance, you might differentiate them into different segments, such as current supporters who already give, but might like the idea of doubling their donation. This might change the way you frame your ask to them to acknowledge their past support, pitch at a similar level to their current gift, and talk about the doubled impact of that. Another segment might be those who supported you in the last Christmas Challenge campaign but haven't given since. So again, you want to reference that past involvement and talk about that year since. You might segment by the level of donation that they currently give. So, a one-time donor or a low-level regular donor versus kind of mid-level up to a more bespoke approach for a smaller number of major donors. You could segment as well by current versus lapsed supporters. Very different messaging for those, I'm sure. You might also look at people who haven't donated previously but are engaged with your cause somehow. For instance, they're on your newsletter, follow you on social media, might be attendees at an event, or even your volunteers as well. Do remember, it doesn't have to only be individuals as well. If you have corporate supporters, you could encourage them to do something like raising funds through a dress down day or a bake sale, and then they can have all the proceeds doubled. So you engage all their employees with that. A top tip, whatever categories you use, make sure an individual only appears in one of your segments. For example, a volunteer might have donated to the Christmas campaign last time, but you want to decide where they best fit because you don't want to be sending multiple messages with conflicting angles to the same person. Just annoying. Another case study from Dorset Blind Association, who won the Small Charity Award in 2018. They raised £17,000 against a target of £15,000. Their main goal was to raise the money required to run their much-needed social and activity clubs throughout 2019, but with also objectives around raising awareness and support of the charity during their 100th anniversary. When planning for the challenge, their events fundraiser and marketing intern focused on raising awareness of the importance of their clubs and the value to the members who attend them. When planning who they were going to reach with their campaign, they identified different groups to focus their campaign upon, including existing big give donors, some of their general donors, some of their kind of wider supporters and volunteers, business contacts, personal contacts, so don't forget your own networks as well. They also segmented new supporters, so people who were giving for the first time recently, event attendees as well. So even though the big give is an online campaign, you might want to use your face-to-face interactions as well and events you've got going on at similar time to raise awareness of the campaign. And then also the general public, so not forgetting that there's an opportunity to engage people who aren't already engaged with your work. By considering their key audiences, they were then able to hone down how best to reach those. So they looked at how those different organization groups were already engaging with the organization, and that's where they focused their activity. For instance, they used their website for existing supporters and the general public. That was the main platform for the campaign. They also used events to promote the challenge to existing supporters, volunteers, potential new supporters, and personal contacts. And they did that by giving out flyers at the event, so maximizing things that were already going on. They also handed out those flyers to their volunteers and to networks to give out, and trustees as well, give to lots of attendees. And then their e-newsletter and quarterly newsletter was used for people already engaged. So you can see how they're thinking about actually what materials, what opportunities do we already have, and how can we maximize those with these key audiences. The next step is around your proposition. A lot of research demonstrates that personal stories are more likely to inspire support. So have a think about not just the overall impressive numbers or the scale of what you do and the overall impact, but people are really moved by personal stories, much more likely to give to the story of how you can change one person's life than the statistics around changing hundreds. Do remind your audience that their donations are doubled, and one nice line to use might be one donation, twice the impact. We definitely know that, especially with the urgency of the campaign, encourages people to up their gift from what they might give without that time-bound imperative to do so. We like this kind of summary of how to think about a structure of your proposition. Need plus solution equals the impact. That comes from our friends at Slack Communications. That helps bring your stories to life. So need, what's the problem your beneficiaries are facing? Not about your organizational needs, so what you want to do as an organization, but your beneficiaries' needs. Ideally expressed from the point of view of one person or animal or space, whatever you work on. The solution, so how do you help solve that problem? What do you deliver that directly helps that person, that animal, that space, that community to overcome the need they're facing? And then what impact do you have? What changes because of what you do? And why does this matter to your audience? So not just what you do, but actually what changes as a result of that. Again, on that person's life or the animal or community, specifically on their life. Don't forget to also include a clear call to action. What do you want someone to do because of the story you've told? Make sure you give them an opportunity with every time you're telling the story and they're most engaged and moved by it, give them that call to action, that opportunity to action it just then. We're going to look at a couple of different creative examples. It's quite a nice activity to get a group together and brainstorm the different elements of your story and messaging. Get your creativity flowing and get some different perspectives. So remember that you're probably not the target market. You're very close to the work. You know it really well. Make sure that you might want to get some trustees' perspectives, some volunteers, some supporters as well, even if you can get them involved. Kind of test your messaging and think about how it comes across to someone from different perspectives. This is a from Chance for Childhood. They started by identifying some target groups, and they also specified specific objectives for each group. So for some of them, it was to increase their support, some of them to get them to donate for the second time or turn them into regular givers. Some of it was around spreading the word. So they really started by identifying those objectives and those people. They established some key messages centered around no child forgotten in Africa. So a very bold statement, very ambitious, and kind of forward-looking. Their message is very much focused on doubling the gift. We know that's a key motivator, that urgency, the why now question. They curated some really lovely beneficiary stories to show the human impact on a kind of individual level. And they did devise different messages depending on how the campaign went in the first few days. In advance of the campaign, they developed some lovely copy and some good visuals, images, case studies for different audience segments and different communication channels as well. Do remember that different channels will have different looks and different content that works well on them. Their campaign was really successful, and that did confirm for them definitely the importance of clearly defining your fundraising messages as part of your planning. It doesn't have to be complex, but just thinking it through at this stage makes a big difference. So let's see how they turn this into real life action. So on the left, we have an email example showing the key need and the impact statements. They really invite the donor to become part of the solution through a donation, and they mention that double donation, that key motivator. So it's inviting them, let's leave no child forgotten this Christmas. It's a really empowering, positive story. You have an amazing opportunity to help ensure no child in Africa is forgotten and to double your impact. That call to action is very high up, very easy to as soon as they're inspired, but then there's more information. There's brilliant photos and stories beneath. On the right, we have an example of a Twitter thread, which to show the story of an individual. This thread works through that need statement, the solution, and the impact beautifully. I'll give you a couple of minutes to just have a look at that and think about how this might look for your charity. What stories could you bring to life in this way? Yeah, sorry about the slight fuzziness of the slide. These are the images we're given, but I'll just make an effort to read out some of the key points there. So here's an example of how they turned this into a print mailing for their supporters. So people that are already engaged and donated to them to tell them about the campaign. Regular donors also received personalized Christmas cards linked to the campaign theme with an insert with information about how to donate. Sorry about that, 1 second. One second, everyone. We'll just get that sorted out. This is a new system for us, so you'll have noticed we've moved to a different format from last year, and we'll just make sure we can make that as large as possible. Is that better, everyone? Sorry about that. So you can see it's still fuzzy, but you can see examples of how they've turned that same messaging, focusing on doubling their donation, making an extra gift this Christmas, tying it into the time of year and that theme, and making something a little bit special for those who are already engaged. Here's another example from a charity called Plant Your Future. They focus on the three main aims of the charity and develop different messaging around each of those, because we know that different ones might appeal to different people. And they actually use the Christmas challenge as a chance to test new approaches to marketing communications, to understand what donors found most compelling about their work. So they use this as an opportunity to test things that they then use throughout the year as well. One thing we loved about Plant Your Future was they used lots of personal stories, and not just with people, the kind of service users and beneficiaries, the smallholder farmers, but also interviewed trustees and staff members and people who have different perspectives. One thing that helps with the planning, which we'll come back to later in the webinar, they use tools around like Trello and WhatsApp. Has anyone used Trello before? Let us know your feedback in the chat if you have, to help monitor tasks and share ideas. So thinking as far ahead as possible, taking the kind of ache and pain out of curating this, and planning as far ahead as possible does give you that space to be creative and create the best materials, rather than once it comes to the campaign and you're just rushed to get out whatever you can. Spend that time at this point. So you can see here on the bottom the three different messages they focused on. So people, biodiversity, and climate. So on the left, we've got around the people. So it's focusing on the different individuals who benefit and involved with the campaign and the work that they do, planting a sustainable future for all of us. Then the second one focuses on the animals, so those people that are most motivated by that element of their work. It's good to be home. It's really light touch, it's quite cheeky, it's lovely and involved, and really good quality images as well. And then finally, the third one is around the climate element. So the world's lungs are being destroyed. It's punchy, and it will definitely appeal to the people who are already engaged with that sort of issue. We've actually got an example from one of the videos that we can share with you now. Hoping the sound works.
Sources of income from cash crops, from the timber, and from the carbon credits, which creates a sustainable model, shifting the reliance from funding to self-sustained growth for those farmers.
Sorry to hear the video didn't work out. We thought that might be a risk, but we'll make sure that we send that, or we tweet that or share that somehow. Rachel will let you know to make sure. You can also find it on their YouTube as well, but it's just a suggestion to have a think about what other medium could you be using. Anything right? So here you can see, this is how they responded to people who did donate as well. This is a thank you letter, which is just as important as the asks as well. So Plant Your Future actually won the Newcomer Award last year. They raised over £11,000, £11,748 against a target of £10,000. They'd never crowdfunded or match funded previously, so this was a really successful kind of experiment for them. And it's really fed into their ongoing social media marketing and communication strategy. So once you've thought about the people that you want to talk to, you've thought about what you want to talk to them about, so how you're going to convince them, and you might have segmented their messaging to tie into each individual group. That third piece is around actually how do you get that message to them? And the key thing for that, especially if you're a smaller organization, and I know certainly I've been in this position before, you don't want to be recreating the wheel. You don't want to be creating loads of extra work for yourself. So think about how you're already communicating with your supporters. Think about what ways they engage with you most. So check out things like your analytics on your website or on your social media if you haven't already, your open rates and click-through rates on your emails if you're doing them through something like MailChimp or another email provider. Think about how you're already engaging with them. And remember that every communication should be driving people directly to your Christmas challenge page. Keep the number of clicks to a minimum. Is anyone else having trouble with the slides? Great, I'll carry on then, because most people seem to be fine. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. You're super quick at responding. It's a Monday feeling, isn't it? So yeah, do remember to not interfere with the journey as much as possible. Make it as smooth as possible. So if you give them a chance to click off the page, they might take it. So get them through to that donation page as soon as possible. A few different things to think about. Make sure your website is the starting point of your promotional activity. You want to have prominent info about the Christmas Challenge on your homepage and definitely in the Support Us section. So if you're getting any organic growth or organic engagement from people who are already interested in supporting you, they know how best to share it and how best to make the most of that through the Christmas Challenge. Keep it updated, keep content dynamic, especially if it's on your homepage. You can share moving images or sliders, things like that. Email will definitely be a really important part of your campaign. Our previous challenge participants have rated it as one of the most successful channels for their Christmas challenge. Make sure you plan several targeted emails. You might want to include a save the date, even as earlier in the year, an email on the launch day, a progress update, and a final update and thank you. So when you hit your target, make sure you keep them involved with that as well. And within those, you will want to segment, as you said earlier, via those people, so people that have supported you before. So you might look at last year, your donation to the Christmas Challenge for our charity was doubled. And over the year, it's helped us achieve X. Help us take it to the next level with this year's one. Whereas for a new supporter, you might focus more on what you know about their motivations for engaging with your charity and those stories. And this will definitely be a top tip from having delivered Christmas Challenge campaigns before. Make sure you write these all as far in advance as possible. Give yourself time to edit them, to refine them, to get other people's viewpoints on them as well. And so on the day or during the campaign when it's all hectic and you're answering all the questions and trying to really rally that engagement, you're not there trying to think with a fresh mind. Think as well about direct mail. So we know that online giving, email giving is still not the main one. Direct mail still has a good place in a fundraising campaign, particularly if one of your audience segments might tend to engage more by mail. So if you're already talking to them, in a print newsletter, pop the Christmas challenge in there, or write some targeted direct mail as well. You want to give a personalized link that's easy to follow, so you do need to think about that journey from paper to the website, and make sure you get it out on time as well. You can't send it as easily as an instant email. You need to be making sure you're planning well in advance for that. How about social media? We know that social media has a great place for fundraising, especially perhaps if Big Give is one of your fewer kind of fundraising opportunities in a year. It's a really nice way to spread that message, to open up that conversation beyond your kind of typical donors. Whether you use Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram, make sure that your social media is planned as well. You can use things like Hootsuite or Facebook scheduling to make sure that you're not kind of coming up with it on the day. Think about the audiences who are engaging with you on social media. When they're doing that, so have a look at when your posts get the most engagement and what information is most relevant to them. So for instance, you might have a lot of followers on your Facebook page who are your volunteers or really close supporters, and you might want them to spread the word to their networks. So making a post that really gives a good summary of your organization and is shareable and it's relevant to a wide audience, not just people who already know you, will encourage those people to share it with their networks. One tip of social media as well is that images and videos work really well. We know that click rates on those are much, much higher than than just text posts. So make sure you use your loveliest photos, or even just create some simple images on things like Canva or even Paint, things like that. How about events? Do any of you already do events that you could be maximizing? If you've already got people in the room with you, it's an excellent opportunity to tell them about the Christmas challenge and let them know how they can take part. We're still on promotional channels. I'm just going to run you through a few of our favorite ones. Naomi said Canva is great for creating images. Excellent recommendation. We love Canva. It's very simple to use. It's a drag and drop situation to create some lovely social media content. And don't forget as well, in promotional channels, that it's not all about showing you emails or tweets. Don't forget your personal approaches, especially for those you're asking to make larger gifts. Do some network mapping. Think about who you already know and have close relationships with and would benefit most from a very one-to-one personal approach. Think about who's best to make the approach. So maybe your trustees, it might come better from another trustee. Or it might come nicely from someone managing the program. So think about who's best to make the approach. Consider their motivations. Are they motivated because they have a personal affinity to the cause, or they're particularly interested in one certain aspect of it? Or can you track any patterns of their previous giving that might give you an insight into their motivations? It's not just about donating. You can use your Christmas challenge as an opportunity to turn those relationships into something really special. It's one of the most popular kind of channels for a Christmas challenge. And one final one on promotional channels that we often forget, and it's something that might slip to the bottom of the to-do list, but it's definitely worth looking at. Focusing on press, especially if one of your key segments might be reaching new supporters or the general public. Take time to think about their readership, what sort of story will resonate with them. So if you're a local charity, a local paper might be the best fit for you. Do your research early, give them a call, try and get in touch if you can, and give them plenty of time and a deadline to share the information. There's lots of good guidance online around writing a successful press release. And lots more guidance as well in your guidebook, which has some useful exercises as well around this. Another case study from South London Cares. They won the 2018 award for Best Planning and Supporter Engagement. Before the campaign, they did personal emails and personal approaches to their closest supporters. They have a really wide reach on social media, so they used videos to drive engagement. They did invest a little in Facebook posts, which worked well for them. But they do know that the main way their volunteers heard about their work is through email. They had 2,000 subscribers on their monthly newsletter, so they really made the most of this. And as well as that wider email list, they identified some specific lists and made sure it wasn't duplicated. So they had 2 different groups of volunteers and previous donors. That meant that they increased their average donation from just £43 in 2017 to £65 in 2018, which is a quite significant jump. And they smashed their target by more than £1,600. One thing I loved about this campaign was around their video use. So the marketing campaign centered around a video depicting a story of a younger and older neighbor matched through their Love Your Neighbor program. It had by far the most engagement of all their online comms. It really connected the ask to that personal story we were talking about earlier. One thing they learned from that 2017 campaign, though, was having just one video meant that they used it in the run-up to the campaign, but that meant that by the time the campaign actually rolled around, the engagement dropped off quite significantly, which meant the call to action wasn't as effective. So in 2018, they decided instead to make 2 videos. The first was an informational video talking about the project and directly linking what a donation would do for the campaign. They released that 2 weeks before the campaign, alongside a launch email. And then on the day of the Big Give launch, that was their biggest marketing push. That kind of gave them the natural momentum of the campaign that lots of other people were talking about as well. They launched a second video online and via mass email to all the volunteers, which depicted neighbours from across the network explaining how South London Cares had impacted their lives. It was very emotive, had that direct call to action. It was focusing on individuals. And they did put some money, the Facebook post money behind it, and it was seen by over 2,000 people and got quite a significant engagement. So it was really worthwhile thinking about the different media and different promotional channels that you can use. So we've thought about those different stages to creating a successful campaign, and we're just going to have a little think about planning. Are you ready for this campaign? Don't underestimate the thinking to make a successful campaign. Hopefully you've already done some of this through this webinar today, but it's really important to get those key deadlines and activities in. There's lots more information in your guidebook about some of the things you should be considering. But do also, one of my top tips, don't forget your post-campaign planning as well as pre and during campaign. We know that the Big Give can be a really amazing way to reach new donors or to increase the support of existing supporters. So you want to steward them well and turn them into really close supporters of your charity. In your planning as well, you want to think about how you'll be monitoring and evaluating the success of your campaign. Make sure you plan in time for a debrief to go back to your objectives, consider how you've measured whether or not the objective has been achieved. For example, at this stage, how will you know whether you've engaged new supporters? Is this as simple as if you have a database, looking at the additional new people on there? Or is it something around the engagement on your social media profiles and things like that? So think about those measures at this point as well. Do remember you can view your campaign progress in the Christmas Challenge dashboard. There's a host of other analytics available on this, which can usually be downloaded after 3 p.m. each day. In your guidebook, there's a grid to help you start planning your approach and make sure you're doing that thinking as early as possible. And you can use that to get this going on. Make sure you've got the whole team on board as well. It might be your responsibility to deliver the campaign, but you will need other people involved throughout. So you might need your trustees to be spreading the word, your staff to be spreading the word. You might need marketing or programs team to help you with those case studies and those messaging. You might need finance to make sure that you know and are responding to donations effectively. So make sure you've got the whole team on board, get them involved. Some key learning from Hope to Action. It was their first year in the Christmas Challenge in 2018. They smashed their target like a phenomenal amount. They raised £46,000 against a target of 11,000. They won an award actually for demonstrating their learning which we really appreciated. We're a big fan of a debrief at the FSI, especially if you're putting all this energy into something like this, especially if it's something a little bit new to your organization. Make sure, like the examples we saw earlier, you're getting the most from it and learning for the rest of the year and for next year too. Hope to Action informed us that there's a lot of trust in the Big Give. People know about it, and having that branding around it and the umbrella of the Big Give was a real confidence boost to them as a charity and to their donors. Staff and donors enjoyed being part of quite a nationwide fundraising effort, and seeing the success of other charities too. It's a very positive atmosphere, and I hope you experience that buzz as well. So that meant they could make bolder asks than they might do in other ways. Their pledges were delighted to be the backbone of their appeal. Having that bold ask really worked for them. Again, this is one of our top tips. A video really worked for them. It's not their usual style, they said. They haven't really experimented with it before, but it resulted in significantly more shares than they'd usually achieve. It's a great way to get your message across in a simple, succinct way, especially to people that don't know your work yet. Great. Oh, we've got Hope into Action on the webinar today. Hello, Sarah. Do share any other thoughts you have as well about what you learned. This brilliant one around valuing your supporters. So it's not just about the asking, it's about actually celebrating them as well, nurturing them throughout the year with information and news so that they're ready to be asked for financial support. You don't want your only interactions with people to be an annual one-off ask. You need to be keeping them engaged throughout the year. And from this as well, they really dug down into what they knew about the supporters and their interests and motivations. For instance, they've now got a cohort of 90 supporters that have a particular interest in one of their areas of work. That meant that they keep them informed on particularly the impact of that project and tailor their communications to them throughout the year. So that worked really well for them actually throughout the year as well. And finally, this might be something you've encountered in your organization. Some of their supporters were not able to or willing to give online, but wanted to be involved. So they were quite creative in how they used this, or they planned to be more creative in how they use that. I've done this before at my previous charity. We had an older donor who didn't have a computer, so he would come to our offices and I'd take him for coffee and we'd do it together in that way. You can be a bit creative about how you do that. You can invite them to be a pledger. That doesn't require actually being online during that week, and there's a bit more flexibility in the giving process. What other ways have people managed that? So that was just some learning from Hope to Action. And I think that debrief bit is really important. And also at this point, you've got a bit of time to do this planning and thinking. So think through what for you in the past has worked well, fundraising wise, or asking for support wise. What's worked well for you? Maybe what hasn't worked, and being honest about why that didn't work. Was it because you didn't have the adequate resource to make the most of it? Was it because you didn't have the right people in the room or the right messaging? So think about all those things and you can learn from that. So to summarize, we've covered a lot in that, and I'm sorry about some of the technical glitches. Those will definitely be cleared up for the next one, which I hope you will be joining us for. Just some top tips to finish off with. Do invest time in planning. I think I've said that many times, and that's having been in your seats before, frantically writing out emails and tweets during the week. The next year, having all that copy ready to go, scheduled in MailChimp, scheduled on Hootsuite, was a lifesaver. Use those 3 Ps to develop your plans. So thinking about, that's all a strategy needs to be. The people, the proposition, and the promotion. Personal stories are incredibly powerful. Use these to motivate your supporters to give. So focus on the individuals and include that clear call to action. So once you've motivated them, you've got them engaged, don't let them drop off. Make it as easy as possible for them to give. So how much are you asking for? What difference will it make? And how can they do that? Always send thank yous. So stewardship is super important. Don't let this be the one time they hear from you this year. Send a prompt thank you straight away that's scheduled in advance or written in advance, so it's as quick as possible. And then also follow up throughout the year ongoing about what difference it made. Set some moments in your diary that you're going to be doing that. Consider how to measure the success of your campaign. So set those objectives right at the start. It needs to be just a short exercise, making them smart, holding yourself accountable to others in your team as well, and think about how you'll actually know when that's been achieved. So, and the Big Give have got a few final tips for themselves as well. Don't forget the matching starts at midday on Tuesday, 3rd December, and that's only available until the campaign closes on, oh, I think that's a typo, the 10th of December at midday. Am I right? I think that's a typo. Campaign launches on #GivingTuesday, which does have a huge reach on social media. Make the most of it. And I don't know how many times you can say this in 45 minutes, but please do plan. You do get out what you put in. It's well worth having a think and having a strategy in place. We've covered lots there. Thank you so much for your questions and feedback. Rachel and I are going to be on the chat now. The info address is there. Lots more webinars coming up as well with more information. And now we have time for some questions. Great question. How far in advance should charities be publicising the Christmas challenge? Is in from now or November? No hard and fast rules, I guess. And I'd want to feed that in with how you're already talking to people. So if you have a quarterly newsletter that comes out soon, you might want to kind of send a save the date out. We used to send a save the date, I think definitely in October, to our closest supporters, and get them involved and get them ready. And certainly those face-to-face and personal approaches can be going on from as soon as you know about that you've been successful in taking part in the campaign. Great question from Kate, which I'd love to hear the answers for as well, because I've not done this myself. Rachel, do you know any examples of when people have used contactless giving as part of a Big Give campaign? Caroline's got an example, question. This is their second campaign. So a big difference is that people who gave last time who are likely to remain one-off donors. Any tips on comms, etc., to encourage them to give again? I definitely, if you haven't already got them involved since last year, send them an update. Focus on that thank you piece before you focus on the asking. Really show the impact of what the campaign did, because clearly they were motivated by something last year to get involved, be it the doubling their impact or the kind of Christmas message behind it. So really focus on what that specific campaign made a difference to. And then one thing that can work nicely is actually keeping them involved more face-to-face, so offering them opportunities after this campaign, perhaps if they do give again, to get to know a bit more about your work. So even if that's a phone call or an event, we can invite them along. Any other thoughts on that? What have other people done? We've got a question from Julie about what would your top tips be for a relatively new charity without a strong supporter base to build from? So that's a great question. I think I'm sure a lot of organizations might be in this position. If you don't have a big database, firstly, be realistic about what you can raise. Don't kind of set yourself unachievable targets with this when it's a bit of an unknown. I would focus on doing a bit of what we call network mapping. So a network mapping exercise with your staff, your volunteers, your trustees, your service users as well. So who's already close to your work and engaged with it and really believes in it? That might be possible supporters or ambassadors as well. So if they're not going to be your donors, what else could they offer? Could they offer influence or introductions or profile to you? Think about what networks you already have into corporates or into local organizations or networks. Make sure you're thinking really carefully about your messaging then. If you don't have people who already believe in what you do, you need to focus on that, making the case and explaining what you do really succinctly and clearly. So do test that messaging with a few different people to make sure it makes sense without prior knowledge. Diana asks, how do you suggest getting donors who've given during the giving week? How do you follow up to get them to donate monthly? So again, I think that's all about that stewardship piece, but also not forgetting to ask. People won't necessarily naturally do it. They won't know unless you're making it clear that you still need the support year round. If you have some kind of scheme in place, like a monthly giving group or a membership or something like that, have information about what that is clearly available, but make sure you're asking and talking about why regular support helps you to plan ahead and makes a really sustainable impact on the organization. But really, it's still about that stewardship piece and talking about the impact. So those personal stories, don't just rely on their kind of festive goodwill feeling to get that feeling of support, but also throughout the year telling those stories. Got a few technical questions which Rachel will be coming back to you on the chat box about, around gift aid and kind of the giving mechanisms. We have a few minutes left for a couple more questions. Emma's asked, what's the best way to build momentum online? So the case study with South London Cares had 2 different videos. And I think that's a really valuable learning. So in 2017, they had just one video, which worked really well. But because they released it a month or so before the campaign, it kind of spent all its momentum at that point. So they instead decided to make 2 for this to 2018. One that was a kind of introduction to their work and a heads up about the campaign. And then one that was the real, okay, hands in pockets, I'm really moved, I want to give now video that came out during the week. So yeah, I think pacing your content, also getting involved in conversations, so engaging your supporters works really well online, especially on Twitter. And think about who your audiences are on social media. It's much better to do 1 or 2 platforms really well than trying to do 4 or 5 less effectively. Great question from Alison, suggesting overseas members or supporters today as part of the campaign week. So I guess you just want to be focusing on your online and whatever channels you're already engaging with them in. Have you got a specific kind of challenge you've encountered with that, or that makes them feel like a different segment to supporters based in the UK? Thinking about as well so that you want both the individual support, so people give to people and people give to individual stories, but also you can tap into their values and their bigger vision for the world as well. Jodie asks, what other ideas do you have for interacting with supporters that aren't online if they live in a different city, etc.? Great question. I'd love to hear if anyone's got examples of what's worked for them. Direct mail, I think we often forget about it. And obviously there is a bit of a cost incurred with it because you've got the postage and the time as well. It's a bit more time intensive than emails. But we do know that it does work. A well-written letter, especially to groups that kind of respond well to that medium, can work really well. I'm going to assume your name isn't Galaxy S10, that's your phone. If not, that's a very cool name. You run the Big Give campaign in early December and then your Xmas appeal to the middle or end of December. Always conscious of overbearing your supporters with communications. Any advice on reducing that risk? Definitely a risk. That's quite a lot in 1 month. Doesn't mean that it can't work. I would think about really carefully segmenting your supporters. So you don't want to be asking presumably everyone for everything every time. Think about who might be most motivated by each different campaign. Make sure you're shaking up the content so you're not using the same case studies, images, stories. You might want to have different focuses, so your Big Give campaign might be project specific or your Xmas appeal might be for a specific item. You really want to, one of the key things with fundraising is you want to get across the urgency of it. So why now? Otherwise people they lose the momentum of it. So thinking about, okay, if someone's given to you a few weeks ago, why should someone give again? So thinking about how you can tell that story, or thinking about in future, you might find it useful to roll them in, especially if it is doubled. That could work very well if you've already got good engagement with your Christmas appeal. You'll know your audience much better. And don't be afraid as well to ask. If you have supporters who are close to you, or maybe your trustees or volunteers are supporters as well, you can ask, how is this coming across? How do people like to be communicated with? Can I get your feedback? Those people quite like to be involved. Someone's asked, do you see the Big Give as a good opportunity to attract new donors or just as a way to motivate existing donors to give again? Yeah, I think it's one of the best opportunities to attract new donors. That worked really well for us. Definitely the majority, I would say at least 80 to 85% of our supporters of the income came from people that we knew about, and that's worked really well. But those 15-20% of new donors or people who were on our mailing list, maybe, or lapsed supporters, made a big difference, and it was really, really useful for the rest of the year once we stewarded them. We had someone who just lived locally and played the piano. It was a music charity, and he just came across it on the Big Give website and on some local social media and gave us a substantial gift. He turned into quite a close friend of the charity, gave again the next year. So that worked really well for us to just raise our profile. It's also really nice if some of your staff or volunteers aren't the most confident fundraisers yet and feel a bit awkward about making the ask. Because it's such a celebratory moment, Giving Tuesday, the big hashtag, everyone's talking about it. It's quite a great, a nice way to get more people asking as well and spreading the word. So yeah, it's definitely a good opportunity to attract new donors. We are past 2 o'clock, so I'm going to have to close it there. If you have any further questions, do drop a line to info, email address info@biggive.org.uk, and Rachel will get you all sorted out. There are plenty more webinars coming up soon, which all the information should be sent to you. And do make sure you will get the slides and the recording as well as your guidebook. So thank you so much for joining us on a quite whiz through the Big Give Christmas Challenge planning today. I hope that's been useful. And good luck, best of luck for your campaign.